The percentage of vacant storefronts on Montreal's most important commercial artery, St. Catherine Street, is exploding, an all-time high, 18.2% in July of this year. At least 105 of the 578 storefronts along its 11 kilometers were unoccupied, for rent, or abandoned. Let's take a look at Montreal's most important commercial artery with Glenn Castanheira, Executive Director of Montreal Centre-Ville. Hi, Glenn.
Good morning, Elias.
Hey, first things first, you're in Chicago right now for a big conference all about downtowns. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more before we get to our downtown?
Sure, yeah. So I'm in the wonderful Windy City for the 69th annual international conference of the International Downtown Association. We have hundreds of downtowns from around the world, amongst others. We have Dublin, we have London, Paris, and of course New York, Chicago, and many, many, many others. And, something that, if anybody's looking for any morale boosts about being a Montrealer is going to one of these conferences and just hearing people's testimonies about how they admire what we do and they love our city. So it really puts us, we're kind of the favorites here when it comes to showcasing what we do and best practice in attracting people. And then we try to learn from the others of the things we don't do so well, kind of like working with the homeless population, keeping downtown clean, and managing construction sites amongst other things.
Okay, so I think what you just said there is going to be very relevant later on in this interview. I just want to tell you one thing about Chicago and Montreal. The last time I was in Chicago, I was in a lift, and we were going to one of those Chicago hot dog places at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and our lift driver, his name was Montreal without the T, okay? And he says, where are you from? And we're like, we're from Montreal. And he says, well, you know what? I'm named after the Montreal Expos. My uncle was a huge Montreal Expos fan, so my mom named me Montreal.
That is unbelievable. But it just goes to show how much our city is really an inspiration for a lot of people and really loved and admired by many.
Couldn't agree more. So let's get down to St. Catherine Street. 18.2% vacancy rate doesn't sound that good. I think we need to go inside these numbers here and get into details because West St. Catherine, East St. Catherine, not the same thing. How do you view these numbers, Glenn?
Well, first of all, there's looking at the broader picture, and I'll take the occasion here, the opportunity since I'm here in Chicago, and we're comparing numbers with other downtowns. The number you just said is high. We don't have our data. We only have for our sector of downtown, which is west of Bury, so the western part of downtown. That being said, that high number pales in comparison to the average that we see in North America. I was with my colleagues from San Francisco last night, and Market Street, San Francisco, that used to have a 2% vacancy, today is at 50% vacancy.
Wow.
Michigan Avenue here in Chicago, which you want to look at a high street with major budgets, Burberry having flagship stores here, and it looks like there's infinite money, and they're at 30% vacancy. So I'm not saying things are good, but we're in a big storm that's hitting the world, and we're faring better than most. Now, to your question, again, we're quite concerned of what we see in the eastern part of downtown, specifically in the Village. That affects, of course, all of downtown and our attractivity. But when we look at the western part of downtown, which is the area that I represent, we have some very encouraging numbers. Vacancy actually dropped 24% in the last year. And of course, being Montreal, when good news are out, that's not what we retain. I mean, if it went up 24%, you can trust that it would be on every single front page of the news. But it's an encouraging sign. Vacancy is going down in the most neuralgic area of St. Catherine Street. Coincidentally, the area that's being renovated right now with the new construction site. Now, while I say that, Elias, it doesn't mean that we're opening up the champagne. It's a positive indicator showing that we're going in the right direction. A 24% drop is massive in vacancy. But we're not out of the woods just yet. It's kind of like climate change and weather. You might have a hot peak, but we'll keep at it and look at the long term. But it is encouraging.
So let me, because I see so many indications. Well, there are a lot of people want to be on St. Catherine Street. So I look at the new store that opened up, Nike, right, with the new
Yeah.
store. And there's other instances of people wanting to go downtown, and then I see those sections, particularly as you head east, that look worse than ever. So, what do we need to do, Glenn, to get the sections of St. Catherine that aren't faring well to be like the rest of the street that is doing considerably better?
That's an excellent question, and something that City Hall is going to have to prioritize. Fact is, Elias, we need to make choices. We won't be able to invest the same amount of money or ensure the same amount of services everywhere at the same time. We need to recognize that sometimes some areas are a priority because they allow to support the rest of downtown and the rest of the city. What I mean by that is that the stretch of St. Catherine that's faring better in the western part. It's faring better, amongst other things, because the new St. Catherine Street attracts people, but also because there's a virtuous circle here. It's a beautiful street, it attracts people, and people attract flagship stores. Stores like Nike, they don't open up on St. Catherine just to make sales in that store. They open up on St. Catherine because it helps their brand reach their marketing objectives. They're there to be seen, and because they have a prestige that they want to give out. And they pay a heck of a lot of rent and a heck of a lot of taxes. Those taxes, and the average in that area, just so you know, is the taxes that are generated per linear meter. That means if you walk on St. Catherine in front of the Eaton Center, every meter you take represents $25,000 in taxes per year that are being levied. Mm-hmm. Now, if that were to crumble, if we were to focus our attention elsewhere, or, heck, if we can do everything at the same time, better, but allow me to doubt that, well, then you'd get a vicious circle where you not only would lose your flagships, but then not have sufficient funds to support the areas of downtown or the areas of the city that are struggling. So first, protect our assets. Second part is really we need to tackle the social crisis that we're seeing downtown. That's a significant problem. It's not exclusive to us. I'm here in Chicago. We know the news. And the main topic, I was yesterday at a conference talking about safety and cohabitation with the homeless population. The room was packed with over 1,000 people because it's the number one topic everywhere in the world, especially in North America.
Okay, so let's talk about that, right? Because you said off the top, right, that cities are learning from Montreal about what we do right, and Montreal can learn from other cities about how they're handling, let's say, the homeless situation. So let's talk about that. Because to me, living so close to this blighted area on St. Catherine Street, and just this week going up to St. Catherine Street in the village area, because that's where my pharmacy and that's where my closest grocery store is. Mm-hmm. And it was a nightmare. Okay, like the whole street was just a nightmare. Back to it, and I know there was like 2 weeks in the summer where they cleaned it up, but it was back to being a nightmare. Are there some cities in North America that are doing a much better job? Because clearly, I just hope saying we're going to take the know-how of Chicago and San Francisco on homelessness and bring it here, that to me is a nightmare. So where are they doing it right? What can we learn from other cities?
I think the first thing we can learn is what not to do. I think that's the most important part, because solutions are quite complex, obviously. But the first thing is what not to do. And yesterday we had, downtown Seattle, downtown Portland, and San Francisco that were being very transparent with the mistakes that they made. And the biggest mistake is to tolerate the intolerable. That means, the whole broken window theory, which is if you allow for petty crime to take place, if you allow for drug dealers to do their business without any fear, if you cut back on policing, then you're in for disaster. And it seems to me that we might be going that way sometimes in Montreal. When I speak with our police services, they tell me that they don't have sufficient officers on the street, that the salaries do not reflect the work they're doing. Just an example here. Did you know, Elias, that being an officer in downtown Montreal, where it's hot, where there's a lot of people, where there's a lot of action, where it's very complex situations, you can have theft, you can have tourists that are lost, people that don't communicate either in French or in English because they're either tourists or they're refugees. Well, that officer gets the same salary that an officer that's patrolling the West Island doing circulation, traffic. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not sure that reflects the duty of these officers that are working very hard to keep us safe. So I think that's one element. The other, obviously, is tackling mental health. Now that's, we're going into the solution part, and it's very complex, but clearly one of the solutions is to work towards housing marginalized population and getting them off these awful drugs that transforms often fragile people into completely zombied people that won't even recognize themselves if they had a chance to see themselves.
Glenn, we spoke to Sterling Downey from the city of Montreal yesterday, and I brought up with him, we were talking about St. Catherine Street, and I brought up to him a text message I got from a listener who said yesterday morning they walked along St. Catherine Street and they saw 3 instances of people shooting up on the street, and it was near the police station, and this listener said the police officers saw this and did nothing. And what Sterling said was, does it help society if we're arresting these people? Okay, and what you just said, the mistake that other cities have made is tolerating the intolerable. So if someone is shooting up, and they're addicted, right? They got there. Terrible things have happened to their lives for them to get there, right? They're shooting up on St. Catherine Street. Based on what we know from around the world, around North America, let's say. Should we arrest those people, or should we just keep walking?
Truth is, Elias, and I don't want to give you the langue de bois, but the honest answer is I don't know. What I do know is that, because I don't know if we should arrest them, what I do know is that if you're replace shooting by urinating. Okay? If you're urinating on the wall, should that be tolerated? I think the answer is no. I don't think that urinating on the wall requires you to be arrested, but should it require an intervention that makes sure that you do not urinate on that wall, and that if you do not comply, you get a fine, and that if you do not identify yourself and you do not get a fine and that escalates, then perhaps you end up getting arrested. But I think the arrest is the last resort. The important part is intervention and making it clear that this is not behavior that is acceptable nor tolerable. And just to make that point very clear, it's not to criminalize, and there's been a lot of studies and talk about this, which is precisely how these cities, like in the West Coast and elsewhere got there, is that it was demonstrated that over-criminalizing marginalized population doesn't help, and that is true. And it's important that we remember these lessons so that we don't repeat those mistakes. But clearly the other extreme doesn't help either. And there's something we need to do about that, and I'm not an expert on the topic, but clearly not doing anything about it is not an option. And the worst thing, and I'll stop with that, Elias, is that the worst thing that can happen is that listener that sent you a message, right, leaves. And that's what happened in all those other cities. And that's what people tend to forget. They leave. They leave because nobody in their right mind wants to cohabitate with misery, with syringes, and for all these other things, and defecation, and there's some really horrible things happening out there.
So, Glenn, we have to leave it there, but I'll leave you on this sad note, unfortunately. I'm leaving downtown. It's done. I'm moving from the downtown area for those reasons, because I can't raise a family in that surrounding. Glenn, thanks. You're the best. Have fun in Chicago. Get one of those Chicago dogs, okay?
I'll do. Thanks for having me.
That's Glenn Castanheira right there, Executive Director of Montréal Centre-Ville.